get by. And earlier in January, when parts of the town started sinking, that's when these cracks became wider and this home became unlivable. Now, people over here have been moved to a temporary home, as have hundreds of other people. The government estimates thousands of people have been affected. It's offering compensation of about $1,800. But many people say the money is simply not enough for them to move and rebuild their lives somewhere else.
German police are back in the village of Lützerath, where they're continuing to evict climate activists for a second day. These are live pictures of the scene right now, where demonstrators are trying to make it as difficult as possible for them to be evicted. They're worried that the village will be demolished to make way for a coal mine. Police say 200 activists left voluntarily on Wednesday, and there are still about 300 activists in the village. Step Varsen has this report.
As dawn broke, police burst into the village, taking protesters by surprise. Activists occupying the entrance to Lützerath were pushed back. Shame on you, they shouted at police. Those who didn't follow orders were carried out, with the police often using force to remove them.
So what we're seeing here is that from almost every state in Germany, police is being sent here for this eviction. And that really shows the priorities of the state and the government. People here who are trying to defend our livelihoods, who are trying to stop climate destruction, that's where the priorities are, to evict those people. And that's really absurd and crazy.
One by one, they're being dragged out, making the village of Lützerath emptier and emptier as we speak. But this protest that has been lasting for years is not over yet.
Thousands of police officers were used to clear the village, which had been occupied by activists for the past 2 years. During the eviction, Dina Hamid hid in one of the houses. She sees Lützerath as a symbol of Germany's failing climate policies.
What we really want is to get as many people here as possible, because we know if we are many, we can still stop the coal from being burned. So that's why we're playing for time. That's where we will be as far as up as we can go, and then they will need some time to take us down.
But their time in the village is running out. While protesters showed some acrobatic skills, police have brought in specialist personnel to remove them from roofs and 3 houses. The showdown at the mine has become particularly uncomfortable for the Green Party, whose minister has been responsible for keeping coal-fired plants open. He says the war in Ukraine has delayed climate goals.
I too believe that climate protection and protests need symbols, but the empty settlement of Lützerath, where no one lives anymore, is, in my view, the wrong symbol. From 2030, no more coal will be used to produce electricity in the Rhineland's coal mines. My political work is aimed at achieving similar deals elsewhere in Germany.
The activists have said that even after the eviction, their protest over the mine expansion will continue. Step Varsen, Al Jazeera in Lützerath.
Brazil's capital is bracing for more demonstrations from supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Security forces are setting up barricades and shutting down main avenues to traffic. On Sunday, protesters stormed the Supreme Court, Presidential Palace and Congress. Since then, messages have been circulating on social media urging crowds to rally against President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's election. And Brazil's communications minister has told Al Jazeera attempts to destabilise the government could become more extreme. He spoke to our Latin America editor, Lucia Newman, in Brasilia.
Inside Brazil's presidential palace, Communications Minister Paulo Pimenta shows us where mobs calling for the overthrow of the government first entered his office on Sunday. He says supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro destroyed everything inside the 2 adjacent rooms and stole documents, computer files, video cameras, and sensitive security information on a hard drive. While some stole the flag, others, says Pimenta, knew exactly what to take and where to find it.
One person was arrested yesterday, and inside their backpack was a laptop from the Institutional Security Bureau.
The minister concedes that some security forces in charge of defending the capital were complicit in the attack. Nevertheless, he insists it's made President Lula da Silva stronger.
This episode is served for Brazilian society to give a great demonstration of appreciation for its democracy and institutions. Large segments of the population that did not support Lula at this moment are behind him, the Supreme Court and the legislative branch, in support of the judicial measures needed to bring to justice those responsible for these criminal acts.
Although he offered no evidence, Pimenta says that as the investigation into Sunday's events advances, former President Jair Bolsonaro's participation in the process will become increasingly clear. Bolsonaro, who left Brazil on the eve of President Lula's inauguration, is in the United States.
Bolsonaro has to return because he created the image of a leader, and now his followers believe that he ran away when they needed him most, like a general in a battle who flees and abandons his troops. He's at a crossroads. Does he return to Brazil and face possible criminal charges for what happened? Or will he hide and go down in history as someone who abandoned his own supporters, like a coward running away?
I asked him if the government could guarantee that there won't be new similar attacks against the country's institutions.
Those people who despise democracy and our federal system have an important organic presence in our country. The more isolated they feel, the more radical they'll become. That's why we're now seeing attacks against power transmission towers. Increasingly, these groups will move from disputing electoral and political power to becoming illegal groups who carry out violent acts that Brazil is not accustomed to. We're now facing another type of opposition which will require a different type of response from the government.
A government that is still fragile and will need all the international support it can get. Pimenta says President Lula is moved by the response to the attack by global leaders, including the support of U.S. President Joe Biden. He confirmed Lula plans to visit the White House in the first fortnight of February to show his appreciation. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Brasilia.
Cambodia is sending a team of mine clearance experts to Ukraine to help clean up landmines and unexploded devices. Tony Cheng has more from Phnom Penh.
Ukrainian mine clearance teams painstakingly go through recently regained territory. It's slow but essential work before civilians can return and start rebuilding their lives.
In fact, our soldiers are immediately followed to the liberated areas by those who restore all conditions for normal life. The first and most basic one is demining. The occupiers leave behind thousands of unexploded mines and ammunition.
An estimated 25% of the rockets and missiles used in Ukraine don't explode on impact, leaving a deadly hazard that must be carefully removed and destroyed. For deminers from Cambodia due to arrive in Ukraine, this is familiar territory in an unfamiliar country.
There will be a similarity, there will be a difference. And however, I strongly believe that standard operation procedure to ensure the safety of operator, not very much difference.
After the civil war in the 1970s and 80s, an estimated 6 million pieces of unexploded ordnance remain hidden across Cambodia. Finding it in the thick undergrowth is difficult, and the explosives become more unstable over time. But the munitions deployed on modern battlefields such as Ukraine are very different. And this is where the Cambodian team can pass on its wealth of knowledge.
The modern munitions that are being used across the globe are vastly different. Obviously, technology has progressed hugely in the last 20, 30 years. But the basics of demining, will transfer.
Often those weapons are produced in nations not immediately impacted by the war in which they're deployed, and that can also serve as a testing ground for new and more lethal munitions. The Cambodian genocide was a very different conflict to the war in Ukraine, but it was waged with weapons from the superpowers of the time, China, Russia, and the United States. Weapons that remained lethal decades after the conflict was over. 30 years after fighting stopped on the killing fields of Cambodia, unexploded munitions still kill or maim hundreds of civilians every year. The legacy of a conflict that prevents people leaving it behind. Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera, Phnom Penh.
Now, nearly 3 years after Brexit, opinion polls suggest a growing number of Britons are regretting leaving the European Union. The change of mind is being driven by the economic downturn that's resulted from exiting the EU. Harry Fawcett went to one of the UK's most pro-Brexit towns, Melton Mowbray, to get a sense of the mood there.
It's market day in Melton Mowbray, but despite the auctioneer's best efforts, the bidding is proving sluggish. For the farmers, disappointment and dark talk of a recent free trade deal signed with New Zealand.
The lamb has been coming over from New Zealand by the ton, tons and tons of it, and unfortunately the last 2 weeks the trade in the local markets has just been hit by a rock. We're probably £15–20 per lamb down.
It's the kind of trade deal Britain's government sold as a potential benefit of Brexit, freeing the country from the shackles of the European Union. Most of the farmers here tell us they still support the UK's withdrawal, that business on the whole has held up well. Some, off camera, say they regret their vote, missing EU subsidies and easier access to the European single market. A few steps away, Stephen Nightingale is less shy. Promised Brexit freedoms, he says, just haven't come to pass.
I voted to leave, and I must say I've sort of wavered a bit, really. You know, I think if I knew what I know now, I'd have probably voted to stay in, really.
This area has long been famous for its pork pies. These days it's also known as one of the most staunchly pro-Brexit places in the UK. But there are growing signs here and nationally that sentiment is shifting. One survey this month suggests nearly 2/3 of Britons support a second referendum in the coming years on rejoining the EU. Another, that 1 in 3 supporters of the Conservative government voted in on its slogan, "Get Brexit Done," believe Brexit has caused more problems than it's solved. Local brewer Conby Crine was always sceptical about Brexit. 10% of his exports used to go to Ireland, but now costs for his retail customers there have doubled, and exports to the continent have also dried up.
Right now, where we might ship, 10,000 or 20,000 beers at a time into Europe, the paperwork, the fixed costs are really making our beers uncompetitive.
But even if Brexit regret is starting to trend higher, neither the government nor the main opposition Labour Party is going anywhere near the political risk of a second referendum, when Brexit as an issue has dropped down the list of voters' concerns.
More people think Brexit has been bad for the economy. More people are saying Brexit was a bad idea. But the salience of Brexit has dropped markedly since those sort of days of 2019 when it was all anyone could think or talk or argue about.
So even if more people are rethinking their referendum vote, Britain is set to keep its status as Europe's outlier well into the future. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Leicestershire in the United Kingdom.
This is Al Jazeera. These are the top stories. Human Rights Watch has released its 2023 report looking at the conditions of human rights in more than 100 countries. It says unchecked power across the world is leading to abuses and violations. Phil Robertson is Deputy Asia Director at Human Rights Watch.
If we look at what's happening in Afghanistan for women and girls, if we look at what's happened, obviously, in Ukraine with the Russian invasion, the situation across the world, unfortunately, has gotten worse. But what we're also saying is it's the responsibility of many other governments, not the traditional governments that have cared about human rights from the European Union, North America, but governments from Latin America, from Africa, from Middle East, and other places to also step up and do something about human rights, to recognize that they have an important role in promoting human rights and protecting human rights and not leave it to others.
The Palestinian Ministry of Health says that Israeli forces have killed a Palestinian man in the occupied West Bank. A 41-year-old was shot in the Kalandia camp near Ramallah during a dawn raid. He's the third Palestinian to be killed in the occupied West Bank in the past 24 hours. The US and Japan have announced plans to expand military cooperation, calling China the greatest security challenge in the region. They've agreed to readjust the US military presence in Okinawa, giving it the capability to target ships. Hundreds of buildings are crumbling and sinking in the Indian Himalayan town of Joshimath. It's being blamed on non-stop construction in the area and a changing environment. And German police are back in the village of Lützerath, where they're continuing to evict climate activists for a second day. These are live pictures of that eviction. The protesters don't want the village to be demolished to make way for a coal mine. Activists have been camping on the edge of the mine for the past 2 years. OK, you're up to date. Those are the headlines. The news continues on Al Jazeera after People in Power, Dead White Man's Clothes.
A weekly look at the world's top business stories, from global markets to economies and small businesses, to understand how it affects our daily lives.
Economic damage, 150 millionaires.
Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Recycling used clothing undoubtedly helps reduce the carbon emissions from the global fashion business. But what happens to the second-hand garments donated to charity shops in the developed world? Some are resold in the West, many of them end up in Ghana, where they support a major industry, employing thousands of people. But they are also now creating a toxic environmental problem.
On the coast of West Africa, the ships arrive day after day with an unrelenting cargo. In Ghana, they call them Obroni Wawu, or the clothes of dead white men.
I'm going to open. We'll sort them into groups. Okay. 9 clothes. So this one is going like this, top quality.
They're the charity shop cast-offs from the Western world.
Dirty. It's sweat. It's, yeah, rubbish. It's like an insult.
Too many of them arrive in unwearable condition. While the trade in used clothes has created thousands of jobs, it's also turning parts of Ghana into a toxic landfill. The world's unwanted fashion ends its journey here. And it's creating an environmental catastrophe of unthinkable proportions. In Accra, the working day begins long before dawn. As thousands of Ghanaians make their daily migration into the centre of this West African capital. From Old Fadama, Accra's biggest slum, Aisha Idrisu and her 18-month-old son Sharif join the throng, working in the second-hand clothes trade. Asari Asamoah starts his day early too. He's a successful importer of used clothing.
I was following my brother whilst we are doing the business, and unfortunately my brother passed away, so he handled everything to me. I always think about him because he made me who I am.
Today, new bales arrive, and Asari is checking on his order. These bales are being dispatched to almost every corner of Accra's commercial heart, the sprawling Cantamanto market. It's a bustling labyrinth where almost everything is for sale.
These markets are one of the biggest in West Africa, if not the world, and they're a central hub for second-hand clothing. From here, they get shipped all over Africa.
For the past 2 decades, the resale of Western cast-offs has boomed here. It's created tens of thousands of jobs. These men and women are retailers eager to seize the best clothes from a prized new bale. They're old friends, but this morning there's lots at stake. So for the next few moments, they're also arch competitors. If they don't grab the best clothes, they don't make money. Aisha is on her way to collect a bale of clothes from Asari, the importer.
And they are found now they are called shop or why and they call why so we okay it's a call why